I'm gonna do a poll tax. That's something we can talk about. All right, colleagues, I think we're ready to go. We'll get started this afternoon. Thank you for everybody who came back. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. We're going to start with issues surrounding online data privacy. So if there's anybody in the room, and this is where our audience gets to participate, that would like to come up, we would love to have you. I have a Margaret Durkin, Michael Johansson, Andy Kingman, Steve Sakamoto Wingo, and Kaylee Locklear. And who? Hannah Abrams. Oops. Sorry. Is there, I know I saw some people in the hallway. Are they here? You guys are here for the data privacy. Is there anybody out there for data privacy? We're getting that conversation started. No, are we missing some people? Yeah, everybody.
So those have been our main issues. I think private right of action, I'll be very curious what that conversation continues to be. That is a concern for us and the broad bills as well as the biometrics bill. But those have been our main issues we have hopefully worked with all of you on, and I'm glad to answer any questions the committee has.
Kaylee, you said you briefly talked about the loyalty rewards program. It seems like the sponsor of the bill is here and may have some language that would appease that issue. But you also said that did you take umbrage with some of the language in the biometrics bill as well? And could you expound upon that, please?
Absolutely. So in broader omnibus bills across the country, we typically see that price discrimination language that's there, as well as the protective language that's been included in every state that has passed legislation across the country. This is actually the first biometric specific bill that's included this language, which we're fine with as long as that protective language comes in on the issue. So just wanted to share that with the committee for a little perspective as well, but I am glad to continue to work with the committee and the sponsor on that language.
And you don't have an issue with the intent of the bill, preventing individuals from selling your biometric data or taking it without your permission. That's not an issue for you.
No, it is not.
Or
No.
the people you represent.
We support privacy rights for our consumers as well.
And you're just concerned with the price discrimination as it applies to your people, because you obviously want to incentivize individuals to, and I guess let me get into that just briefly then. So
Sure.
when you're incentivizing individuals to join the opt-in, as you say, the data you're collecting, what does that consist of?
So typically when you sign up for a rewards program, and I just did this recently, I don't know, I'm on my 14th rewards program, but typically they take your name. I mean, you could actually just make up a name if you didn't feel comfortable. And typically they just request an email address. And then when you use your loyalty rewards card as you're shopping, then we're going to push coupons to you. And the reason that we're doing that is our industry is highly competitive. We want our consumers to come back to us. If we know that you're searching for a certain product, we're going to offer you coupons. Some stores just more broadly will send you coupons as you spend money because we want you to keep coming back. And that's the whole thought process behind these programs, is to keep consumers coming to their stores and be loyal to those stores.
And I understand that, but do you have a problem? Do your clients have a problem with us preventing or precluding them this individual information from being sold for profit?
I would say that our industry is not doing that in the way I think other industries are. And the reason is this is proprietary information for us. When we find out information about a consumer and we know what that consumer likes or needs or what they respond to, we want to keep that consumer coming to us. It is not beneficial for us to turn around and sell that to our competitors. So this is not common practice in the retail industry.
And the reason I ask is because, well, let's just say that you find out through the data you collect that C.T. Wilson likes to buy honey baked hams. And then you find a list of 500,000 other people that also, and I think it would be a financial benefit if you were to sell my information, i.e. my email and name, to honey baked ham so they can reach out directly to us for other sales. I think there could be a financial benefit from contacting these individuals that create these products. And that's the concern, is that my information, be it my name and my cell phone number and my my email, can be sold to other individuals or entities. So the question is, do you oppose us, not allowing even for the retailers to sell that data to other individuals that's collected?
No. So again, we would be subject to all of the other provisions under this bill. This just ensures that we would be able to charge separate prices for consumers that have opted into a loyalty program. By no way are we then exempt from the rest of the provisions.
So you do not oppose the other, that's all.
That's yeah.
Got you. Okay. And again, not to put you on the spot, but since your light is up, are there any other questions for me and my colleagues in this?
Mr. Chair, would be remiss to private right of action continues to be a topic we're concerned with.
And what's the concern there, ma'am?
Well, that it's opened up litigation in states like Illinois. I know you're going to hear quite a bit from others on this, and it's created niche industries where businesses are being sued. I know we've talked about this. This comes up, and I don't know how many bills in this committee. And every bill we see private right of action, I think we have a very similar conversation on this. So I know it's not surprising, but creating a niche industry to go after businesses with regard to this is concerning. We believe that it should fall under the Attorney General's office, and that you all are laying out a path with which those businesses would be held accountable.
And I'll say this is it's an ongoing tension in my committee between that private right of action in the AG's office and an understaffed Attorney General's office that may not be able to do all the things that our citizens need them to do. So time and time again, when people bring this private right of action, I do understand what you're discussing, and I'm obviously not for creating niche industries. And although I'm a lawyer, I don't think that we need to fund our, line our pockets anymore. But we also, the goal is protect the citizens in finding the best way to incentivize these businesses to not sell. Because, and I guess in this specific instance, when we're talking about selling or transferring, I try, and I guess maybe I'll hear some horror stories about these niche industries that are created. You got to violate the law. If you are selling, whatever your theory is about, you're doing it without somebody else's permission. So while I don't often agree with private right of actions, I'm just not universally, it's not a blanket, exemption where I refuse to pass a bill with private right of action. So I would be, curious to see where the ceiling, or excuse me, where the sky is falling when it comes to illegally basically giving up other individuals' information for a profit. So that's my take on it. I believe the committee members are mostly in the same, tension that I live in. So, but I'm sure there will be other individuals to, expand upon what you're saying.
Yep. Absolutely.
Who'd like to go next?
I'll go next, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, sir.
All right, thanks very much. Again, my name's Andrew Kingman, represent the State Privacy and Security Coalition. So our coalition is a group of over 30 companies and 6 trade associations, and we span any number of sectors from telecom to tech to payment card to healthcare to automotive industries. And, our job is to try to find solutions that work for the widest number of groups. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and chat today. And I think it's really helpful to start this conversation prior to session, and hopefully there's some consensus that can be reached as we go into session. Obviously, we've all had these conversations for the past 3, 4, 5 years. So it's our hope that we can help be constructive partners. I know you all heard a little bit from NCSL this morning about what has happened in other states, but to my mind, I think the first threshold question that would be helpful to move forward in this debate is whether this committee and whether it's right for Maryland consumers to take a sectoral approach to privacy. So to only try to regulate one type of privacy like biometrics or like children's privacy, or to move forward with a comprehensive model that regulates all types of industries, all types of data that are linked or reasonably linkable to individuals, and to establish controls for consumers so that they don't get confused about, well, is this, only from this type of industry or only this type of data is regulated. I think last session across the country in all 50 states, and again, I expect you've heard a number of this, but 7 states passed comprehensive privacy laws. They all stem from the same framework. And I know we've talked in this committee before about sort of that Connecticut framework. All of them, while all of those laws, of course, have their own unique features, they all work fairly interoperably. We're at a point now where about 25% of the US population is covered by these laws. And the great virtue of these laws is that they have been passed on an overwhelming bipartisan basis. The total votes in those 11 states is 3,140 to 30. in favor of this legislation. Groups such as the ACLU and Consumer Reports have come out in support of this framework in states like Connecticut and Virginia and Montana. It's something that has gone through a number of bipartisan work groups, such as the Oregon Attorney General's Privacy Task Force that we were a part of, multiple work groups in Connecticut, in Texas. So again, we believe that a comprehensive solution is the best way to move forward. These frameworks do provide heightened protections for data like biometrics. These frameworks accomplish many of the same goals that the standalone biometrics legislation has done. It does establish some heightened protections for children's data as well, for things like precise geolocation data, for health data, for data regarding sexual orientation or race. And so I think the other benefit of having gone through 11 state houses at this point is that many of the issues that typically come up, like the right balance between opt-in and opt-out consent, like how to balance opting out of the sale of data, but still allowing loyalty programs to continue, have largely been vetted and worked on. And so certainly there may be particular priorities that Maryland wants to address, but I think moving forward with a comprehensive framework, in our mind, is the best solution for both Maryland consumers and Maryland businesses. The last thing that I will say about this framework is that it's generally designed to be sustainable over time. So when you look at a framework like California's, I think one of the reasons that that hasn't been adopted in other states is that it's very granular, it's very prescriptive, it's very difficult to understand. And these bills are designed to be sustainable over time, to incorporate new issues that we know are going to come down the pike, like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I think that's the other great benefit of these frameworks, is that they are designed to be a foundation from which privacy issues can be built on within the state. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
A question. So when you're talking about these other states, did you include Montana in the other states that you were talking about, the framework?
Yes, I did.
Because it sounds like that they just took the language that Tiffany wrote and made it their own, because I believe they adopted theirs well after we tried to adopt ours and we got a lot of pushback.
Montana adopted a framework that was virtually identical to the Connecticut Comprehensive Privacy Law. I believe that's the bill that.
I mean, I think it was almost exactly the language we wrote, but
it is. I
guess
I don't believe that's correct,
so
but I'm happy to chat offline about it.
Do you think Montana has the child data privacy in their current framework?
They do, yes, they do. But to be clear, it is not the age appropriate design code language. And I'm not sure to the extent that NCSL discussed the injunction that California granted, and I'm happy to talk about that.
No, we're familiar with that.
Okay.
Because that's the issue we're facing, is trying to figure out, which is also the difficulty in passing a comprehensive bill. It becomes much easier to stall out in one of the bodies, because when you have so much going on, it's very easy for people to get caught up in one or two parts of the framework and it dies. So this is always our concern, especially because we know we have to do something for the children this year. Privacy is very important. The reason they'll probably be separate is because we need to make sure that they're addressing different issues, and we know the more we pack into it, the more comprehensive, as you say, the bills become, the easier it is to kill. And we need to make sure that we, again, move in such a way that both of these bills pass, and we're serving different audiences when we deal with these issues. Obviously, there's a difference, while biometrics, the kids have biometrics, we can easily bifurcate those. So I'm not sure we'll be having one large comprehensive bill this year. I think we'll probably do what we did last year and have two bills, one dealing with the children's privacy and another dealing with the overall privacy issues. For this point, obviously, I'm open to suggestions, but just from my own observation of the way things seem to be moving forward.
Yeah, and I would just say, in again, in my experience, just working in the other states, the comprehensive bills have actually been much more successful at moving forward than the sectoral bills. And,
Yeah.
you know, would just offer that as.
And I'll say, here's the issue. I'm not going to just pass a bill to have one under my belt. I don't care if it's not doing what we need it to do. I don't need to pass a bill. So a bill passing through the Senate and the House is meaningless if it doesn't do what we need it to do as a body.
Sure.
So I'm more intent on the subject matter and how we solve the problems than I would be on a successful bill, because I'll war and fight it through on my own terms. But I'm not going to just have a bill just because it's washed down and it's, watered down, and it passes. We're not going to pass something. We're going to pass something meaningful. So I would, again, I hope that you're joining in on the conversations. I know the interested parties. I am one of them. I will say that to anybody listening. I am very interested in this issue. It was very frustrating the way things stalled out in the last round, and I plan on fighting that much harder and making it known that I am taking a personal interest in the privacy and the children's privacy protection bills this year. So take that for what it means. I'm looking forward to working with you and hearing but as I said, I'm not one of those guys that just say, hey, go work it out. Because sometimes there's a right answer, sometimes there's a wrong answer. And I don't need that to blend together. We have to do the right thing. I'm not trying to do something to get a bill passed. I want something meaningful. So I look forward to working with you, finding out what your issues are as this bill has been constructed and as we move these bills forward. Who'd like to go next? Yep, ma'am.
Hi, Margaret Durkin with TechNet. TechNet is a technology trade association. We represent about 100 members and 4.5 million employees in the spaces of data privacy, IT security. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. As noted in remarks from earlier this year in both the House and Senate, TechNet is committed to providing a safe, age-appropriate experience for children online. And Andy touched on more the omnibus privacy side of things. I'm here to speak more on our concerns that still exist on children's data privacy, specifically on the over-inclusive standards of the bill. So in the AADC language, it's been changed from likely to be accessed by children, which is very over-inclusive and broad and could subject websites that probably aren't the aim of this legislation into the bill. Age verification is also a complex challenge for our industry, and stringent age verification requirements would require the collection of even more data and more personal information, which goes against data minimization standards. And again, a lot of the terms within the bill are subjective, so we are looking more to shift towards the omnibus privacy solution that does include all-inclusive rights for children. Thank you.
Any questions for her before I begin? Thanks. So with all due respect, Mr. Kingman, I think maybe the California bill hasn't been replicated because you are very good at your job. But And I'm pleased that you mentioned the Oregon bill, because we do see a lot of things in the Oregon bill that we would support wholeheartedly. One of the things that we've seen increasingly is the explosion of data collection. Data brokers are making millions of dollars on a daily basis. They're sweeping it up. Imagine a vacuum, and it's just going and being processed and sent and sold. And it's dangerous. Consumers, even when they're given a choice, don't necessarily know what they're giving up. And it's really important that any consent is done with an understanding. For example, if if someone agrees to loyalty rewards, great, but do they understand what they're giving up and what kind of data they're giving up? And it's not always clear that that's happening. We advocate for data minimization, as was mentioned, and that involves collecting only for the purpose that the consumer is actually giving it up. You don't get to just collect because it might be useful at some point in the future. And if a consumer asks to delete it, having exclusions like internal research can be used very broadly. And so we have to really think about how these things can be interpreted. The FTC recently attacked Amazon because they were using Alexa and collecting children's voice prints and information, despite the fact that parents were asking for them to be deleted because they thought it would be useful for internal product research. We also think that data assessments are important, and that's a feature that exists in most of the omnibus bills. But one thing that should be spelled out is that those data assessments consider the harm to consumers. The Sedona Conference a couple of years ago advocated for the harm to consumers to be considered when you're evaluating data security. The same should happen for privacy. And if there are harms, how are those harms going to be mitigated? It's not that every harm needs to be avoided, but there needs to be a thoughtful process about how you're impacting consumers when you've made a choice to collect their data. Or in terms of the private right of action, and I know that that's a contentious one. As Chair Wilson mentioned, there is a resource issue, but it's not just a resource issue. The Consumer Protection Division, the AG's office, does not bring a case for an individual. We don't represent individuals. We identify patterns and practices and pursue those cases. An individual can get left out if you have a harm, genetic data, whatever it is. I can't imagine all the harms that might come because every day we're learning new ones. And with AI, those only increase. A consumer will have no recourse unless there's a private right of action. And remember that the private right of action in Maryland's Consumer Protection Act is limited. It only allows for a private right of action if there is actual harm. Now, I worked on the other side of the aisle for many years. I represented companies defending them against data breach lawsuits. And most of them couldn't even allege actual harm. They failed at the motion to dismiss stage. Yes, you have to oppose a motion to dismiss, but companies can do that. So if there is actual harm, the Consumer Protection Division does think that a private right of action is advisable. And I haven't heard in Maryland of extensive Consumer Protection Act cases brought by private litigants against companies for violations of the Consumer Protection Act. It hasn't been a niche industry here. In a lot of cases where it has been a niche industry, in Illinois, for example, tech companies were collecting biometrics for years, ignoring the fact that this law was on the books, prohibiting it. So it wasn't just that they started doing it and immediately a niche industry appeared. But when you have someone doing something for 10 years or 5 years, and then the consumers realize it, it will create a lot of litigation. But just because that's happened in one instance doesn't mean it will happen in every instance. And there was a lot of litigation about whether it needed to establish actual harm. Finally, I think that it's really important to focus on data level exemptions. There are times where companies should be exempt entirely because of the data that they're collecting, but exempting entities will lead to overbroad exemptions. Obviously, entities do want to be entirely exempted because they can just ignore the law. It's easier. But the question is whether all of the data that they collect is covered by a different statute. To the extent that there are gaps between statutes, that data should still be covered by any law that the Maryland legislature passes. Thank you.
And I got you, Steve. And Hannah, I appreciate your expertise on this. I do look forward to hearing from you. It's always Steve telling us what he can't do, so it's fun, refreshing to have somebody else from the AG's office tell us what he can't do.
Well, he doesn't do enforcement, so.
But I wanted to ask you talk about the data level exemptions in the entities. Is there a state that you're modeling that is doing that correct? Is like, because we talk about the omnibus bills, things of that nature. Is there a state that's actually covering that in a way that you see fit? And if not, you can always get back. I don't need to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine. It's not exact. There's no state that does it perfectly, but I think we can learn from all of them.
Sure.
And Oregon does do it quite well. And I'm happy to discuss specific exemptions if you're interested.
Thank you. We have Steve.
Somebody said, was there 11 states that have done this? Was that the number I got?
Yes, that's correct. So 12 states have passed comprehensive privacy. There's California, and then there's 11 other states that have kind of done the same thing.
Okay, has any of them had private right of action in?
No, and even California does not have a private right of action for
California, as
privacy
I understand it,
violations.
is a panel. They put a separate group together. Is that correct?
I'm sorry?
California has their own group that does that. They don't use the AG's office. Is that right?
They have their own data protection agency. They have a limited private right of action for data breaches, but not for privacy violations.
So these all have been bipartisan bills that have passed.
That's
And
correct.
private right of action seems to be the biggest focal point. So I would hope that maybe we could follow some of those models. And as far as the Attorney General's office, they're not using that anywhere. Is that right? I mean, they're not using that. Most states are using the Attorney General's office to litigate.
Most states are using the Attorney General's office. As Mr. Kingman mentioned, there is a separate agency that's doing it in California. They have a $10 million budget. So if we'll take that.
Well, I understand that, but if you have a difference between bipartisan support for something versus not, maybe $10 million is cheap. Isn't that so? Thank you.
Delegate Boafo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Margaret, a really quick question. Hate to do this to TechNet just because we have a longstanding relationship. Appreciate all the work that you guys have done over the years, but you said something that was kind of concerning regarding child data privacy, specifically when it comes to age verification. You said age verification is hard to do, right? And I know some of your members represent some of the biggest cloud companies in the world and financial management institutions. So it kind of talk to me a little bit about how is that hard for, at least from your member company view, age verification when it comes to child data privacy in specific?
Sure. So it really goes back to what I mentioned previously about the data collection and just the liability that it would place on platforms and websites to collect extraneous data that otherwise wouldn't be collected. And Andy, if you want to touch more on age verification.
I think there are a number of concerns, and I think they were discussed in the injunction ruling that came out of California. But there are a couple of concerns. The biggest is that it incentivizes and effectively requires companies to collect age information from almost all of their users. And so the ways to do that aren't particularly privacy protective. So, one kind of higher level concern is the loss of anonymity for teens who may be looking for information on things like reproductive care, on things like LGBTQ issues, that there's a loss of anonymity because they'd have to provide their information. The court found that there were significant First Amendment implications in age verification. And what they said is that the age estimation provision there appears not only unlikely to materially alleviate the harm of insufficient data and privacy protections for children, but actually likely to exacerbate the problem by inducing covered businesses to require consumers, including children, to divulge additional personal information, and that they were indeed concerned with the vast chilling effect of the age estimation provision specifically. And so again, it's not a clear black and white issue on, is this a good idea or not? I think it requires a lot of input and stakeholder work to figure out what the constitutionally permissible ways to figure out some of these issues are.
Right. And I just want to be clear, as we're having this conversation, not just here, but also as we head into next session, that when we use phrases as it's hard for us to do, I know there's some member companies who believe that they can't do certain things, right? But the liability argument is a real legitimate constitutional argument, right? We could have that argument all day, and I think that's the appropriate place to have the argument. But when you have member companies who are saying they can't do something in effect to skirt policy recommendations. That's where I think my concern really is. So I just want to make sure that we flag that as we move forward, that is a liability conversation, which I personally agree with in this particular case, but I can't say that member companies can't do that, right? That's two separate conversations.
Thank you, Delegate. And also, I just wanted to add before we go on to the next question that when we talk about the omnibus bill, you know, we're talking, there's two different things we're speaking of at the same time. We were talking about, you know, data privacy, data mining, but we're also talking about protection. Part of the bill that we haven't really discussed here, you know, when it comes to our children, are minimizing negative impact. And you heard earlier, so it's not just about what data you're collecting from the individual. It's finding a way to protect our juveniles and our infants under the law from the undue harm and harmful behaviors, harmful impacts, mental health issues that some of just the mere access alone provides, which has nothing to do with any data you collect. So again, this is why sometimes the bills are bifurcated. Going on to, I believe, Delegate Queen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so before I ask my questions, I just want to, reiterate, I'm not an attorney, so sometimes I don't kind of understand some of the things you all are saying. I've always heard that the Office of Attorney General was the people's lawyer. Is that not the way we look at things? Because the comment that you can't represent individuals, I don't quite understand that.
So we represent the peoples, not individual people.
Not peoples. Okay.
And it also depends on which division, but I'm talking specifically about the Consumer Protection Division's
Okay.
mandate.
So you could do a class action suit then out of the Office of Attorney General.
It would not be a class action suit,
Okay.
but we would, if there was a pattern in practice,
Mhm.
you see something abroad impacting a lot of Marylanders,
Okay.
then we could bring an enforcement action, and we do frequently.
Okay, so out of the 11 states that we've talked about that have passed the omnibus bill about data collection, and some of it includes data protection, I believe, as well, right? They don't have, as was stated, any private right of actions in those. Is that your understanding as well?
There's a very limited one in the California bill, as Mr. Kingman.
Limited in California. Okay, and
mentioned.
so those states then, how are they handling that sort of issue?
So I don't know what all of their divisions and how they are structured and what their capacity is.
Okay.
There may be a lot of individuals that get left out, and we don't know how that's going to impact.
Okay. So if we wanted to in Maryland have the Office of Attorney General do sort of a representation of peoples who are having trouble with data collection and data privacy, we would have to open up another division, or we'd have to hire more staff. I mean, how could that be done?
Perhaps, I'm not going to speculate. I'll let Steve answer that because
I mean,
he's the expert on legislation.
All right.
But I would say it would also require a lot more staff if it were going to be on for individual cases. And
Right.
As it is, the privacy bills in a lot of the other states add a number of attorneys and other kinds of staff, including technologists, to their divisions that are working on these.
Right, because as a legislator, we want to protect the peoples of our state. And so if that's the best way to do it, to me, that makes more sense to see if we need resources or we need other help to make sure that we aren't leaving out individuals who may not have the means to do some sort of private right of action. I mean, that's just my thought. And you would see patterns better that way, but I may be wrong from my perspective. I'm not an attorney.
So when we're talking about patterns and practices, we're talking about a company that is doing something to a lot of people.
Correct.
And that's something that we can pursue. But if something happened and it just impacted a couple of people, that's not something we can pursue.
How would you know that's happening without?
That's part of our investigation.
How would you know to bring it up? Somebody has to bring it to you to know to look at that, right?
The way that a lot of our cases come is through consumer complaints. So that is one
Okay,
of the
so you do
ways that we
use that.
do learn.
Okay.
And that's how things percolate up. We also have other means, but that is a very prevalent way.
Okay. And from the states that have passed, is there any that you think are better or that we should look at Maryland to start to look at a framework?
I think Oregon and Delaware are probably a great place to start.
Thank you much.
Chris?
Chairman. So Hannah, I want to thank you for your testimony and, I was listening to the chairman talk and, he and I and others joined at the same time. So I have a, 9-year track record in committee and listened very closely to colleagues, certainly CT, who is now our chairman, when he says there's tension in the committee over this issue. And I would just say one comment before I ask the question, which is this issue of private right of action comes up quite often. And there is tension because there are many bills theoretically that I would vote for and support, but for the private right of action. And here's my statement, and then I'll get to the question. And when I look at a bill, and maybe chairman looks at it the same way, maybe differently, I think it's important that the committee be firm, strong, but we can also be fair. I mean, I thought about this last year. I mean, is this bill fair? Is it appropriate given what we're trying to do as a state? And it failed last year, and it, well, in my eyes, fail again if we go to the mat over this private right of action. So here's my question. And I brought this up at the earlier panel, which is you've got, in our state, the interests of trying to make law that is workable, that we create clear, bright line paths to compliance with the law. When you're faced as a company being charged by the Attorney General's office, you've done something substantial, you violated a firm law in our state. And how do you not see that as being the appropriate? Because you are the agency, you are the Attorney General, an elected official who is responsible for and voted for by the people. How are you not the correct place for serious violations like this to be heard, adjudicated, and give relief to the extent it's needed to the peoples of our state?
Thank you. I think we are the correct place.
Okay.
But I am just highlighting that there will be individuals who do suffer actual harm who will not have any recourse if this is the place that the direction the committee wants to take. Now, that said, as Chair Wilson mentioned, this is going to be moved forward if it goes forward by consensus, not by everyone being happy. So it is your job to decide how to make that happen, but I will give you information about my experience and leave it to you. I'm not a legislator.
I'll give you thanks for giving me suggestions on how to work in the committee. I don't win every battle here, but I do fight the good fight. And I think what I'm trying to say, if anything, is if we're going to pass comprehensive national law, this becomes an easier issue because I think you do create fair and easier to comply with laws that relate to multi-state businesses. What we seem to be moving forward is narrower and state-related action, and therein lies the rub. So, my voice in the committee may sway or may not, but I'm saying to you very simply that a vote for or against this bill is not going to be whether or not I think child privacy is mission critical, and whether me as a citizen has the right to privacy, how my data is handled. It's going to come down to whether or not I like the idea of the trial bar being able to take a law and then using it as a business model to grow their industry. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chris. And Hannah, Steve, I think you see one of the main issues here. I believe that we're going to be working very hard, but to create policies for child protection and data privacy. But I think the issue does come, and this will obviously I'm going to call the Attorney General Anthony Brown in, and we'll have a discussion to see just what you can lend to this discussion. Your expertise, Hannah, seems obviously deep, and we need to make sure that we move forward with the strong bill. But I think a lot of times we just get disappointed because it seems like every time we pass a bill, the AG is like, oh, we can't do that. But then they'll come in with about 14 or 15 other bills that they're like, we want to expand to this and expand to this and be able to do this as well. And I know this because I harass Steve about this pretty much every year. I know he has a job to do, so I'm just kind of, he's just the target of the day. But, and again, as I've said before, because we're trying to create, good, strong legislation, it would be nice to have our Attorney General basically in the same, with the same views that we have. And I know you have the same views, but also ready to support, what we do. I don't want to work, in opposite of you, but I want to make sure that you do understand and take it back with you that it's very hard in this committee to get bills out that have the private right of action unless there is a distinct, something that you can demonstrate. And so we're not saying no. I'm just saying that I want you to see the battle lines where they are. And I do not want them to get in the way of this bill becoming law this year.
Understood. And
Thank you very much. I'm looking around and I don't see any more questions. So I believe everybody was here for the data privacy or privacy action has been covered. So we will move on to electricity, energy, and related issues. We have quite a few people in the room. I'll let my vice chair take over before he falls asleep. Let's step out for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I can just let whoever briefs up there and then we can just roll through whoever's left, right? I gotcha. Oh, yippee. Yeah.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Yep, go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Acting Chair Crosby and members of the Economic Matters Committee. I'm Charles Washington here on behalf of BGE. I'm joined by my colleague, Mark Case, who is not a lobbyist, but who is here at my request. His team designs and implements BGE's award-winning Empower Maryland energy efficiency programs. He will have the substantive conversation for our company today and work through the slides. I'll turn it over to Ms. Case, Ms. Clace to introduce the PHI panel.
Can you hear? Oh, there we go. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Ann Clace here on behalf of PEPCO and Delmarva Power. With me today, I have Ms. Morgan O'Donnell. She is our Vice President of Regulatory Strategy and Policy for PEPCO as well. She is not a registered lobbyist, and she is here at my request to answer some questions surrounding Empower. We look forward to a productive conversation, and I'll turn it over to you, Morgan.
Good afternoon. Flip to the slide. First, thank you for the opportunity to be in front of you today to discuss what has been, as Charles mentioned, an award-winning program, the Empower Maryland program. I'll just dive into the presentation. The first two slides of the presentation really showcase the successes of the program. The Empower Maryland program is perceived industry-wide as a leader. The state of Maryland is a leader in this space. Over the inception of the program, there's been a reduction in consumer energy and demand between BGE, PEPCO, and Delmarva Power of over 12 million megawatt hour savings during the program profile. In terms of awards, on the slides, you'll see listed many awards that have been given to the utilities. One really highlighting that we've been an Energy Star Partner of the Year many times over for all three of the utilities. The portfolio has provided benefits to customers that have outweighed the cost of those programs. And lastly, another key stat is the PJM revenues. We've been able to pass back approximately 600 million in PJM revenues, 100% back to customers over the time that we've been operating the program. Go to the next slide. Thank you. So there is a proceeding in front of the Maryland Public Service Commission. In August, the Exelon Utilities filed 3 separate filings with 3 different types of scenarios. This was under a direction from the commission to file scenarios which are listed below in the slides. I'll go into more detail in a second. But essentially it was to how can we achieve the continued increasing goals of reduction to energy savings. And they asked all the Maryland utilities to come forth and propose these scenarios. The commission issued an order in March of 23 after there had been significant working group sessions and then legislative hearings on the future goals of the Empower program. The first scenario to the left is really the business as usual scenario, which what that does is essentially keeps the program as is with increasing goals, but essentially using the same programs that we use today. When you go to the max scenario, that's really to address GHG abatement and the goals of the CSNA that increase the goals for energy efficiency, but that's really an unconstrained max scenario where you maximize the GHG. And then the third is the middle scenario, which is really a sort of, it's literally the middle scenario as described, where it's between 2023 and the max scenario. Listed below really were the things that the commission wanted us to address, which was one, how did these contribute to GHG abatements to meet the state's goals? How do you maximize and meet the energy savings that are proposed in the CSNA that was as of April 22? Is it cost effective? Does it support the state policies? And obviously we wouldn't want to unduly burden ratepayers. So I'll turn it over to Mark. Mr. Case to.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and delegates. I'm going to talk specifically about the BGE Empower Maryland filing that we made on August 1st, what it costs and what it produces over the next 3 years. This is our filed program. It hasn't yet been adjudicated by the commission, so we expect a decision in December. But as filed for the next 3-year cycle, costs are definitely going up. BGE's proposal, and this includes the Department of Housing and Community Development, DHCD, but our total over the 3-year period is a $1.3 billion investment in energy efficiency, which is more than double what it was in the current 3-year cycle that is just about over. In terms of the customer bill impacts, we are going to see higher surcharge levels for both residential and commercial customers. We expect the residential rates to go up between 227 to 395%, depending on which scenario the commission adopts. And for the commercial customers, we will see a 6-fold increases in the surcharge levels. And that, you know, those are big numbers. And there's sort of 4 main drivers that are causing the higher expenditures in this cycle. The first, and this is good news, is that residential lighting has over time become more and more efficient, such that the standard now is efficient lighting. So the utilities can no longer take credit for savings for customers installing efficient lighting because that's now the baseline. But that was a large part of all of the utility programs. Secondly, based on recommendations of stakeholders, certain stakeholders, the commission has elected to cap how much of the savings can come from what we call front of meter programs. And in BG's case, in PHI's case, we have certain programs that manage voltages that do a lot to achieve efficiency savings. Those will get capped going forward, so we can't count that as much. And the result is that we have to fill that gap, about a 40% gap, with new programs. Each incremental megawatt hour saved is slightly more expensive than prior levels. The so-called low-hanging fruit, let's say, has been used up at this point. So that all goes into it. Third, we have higher targets. As Mr. Donald said, we're moving from a 2% per year standard to by 2027, we'll be at 2.5%. So 25% more megawatt hours each year must be saved. And then finally, the commission has made a decision on how cost recovery will work going forward. So costs will be expensed, which means recovered in a single year rather than being spread out over 5 years. And that too puts pressure on the surcharges. most of the money that we invest in Empower Maryland goes directly to consumers. You see the pie chart here that shows 78% of the dollars are direct rebates to our customers. The programs are cost effective. They, between direct savings and environmental benefits, they all produce savings in around the range of $1.50 per dollar spent. And then finally, I'll note that as initially filed, we included a building electrification program to help meet the CSNA goals to start that journey towards our customers using electric heat pumps as their primary heating source. The commission has decided that's premature until Maryland adopts a pathway for how it will achieve the CSNA goals. So we are invited to refile anytime beginning in 2024, once the report from MDE comes out at year end. And you can go to the next slide. The two scenarios that are most under consideration for BGE, one is the 2023 scenario. You see its cost is 1.3 billion over that period of time, including almost 200 million from DHCD to support the low income customers. The megawatt savings, which is the peak demand reduction that we can achieve, is close to 700 megawatts, and the life cycle GHG savings 2.7 million metric tons reduced. Compare that to the middle scenario. It's the same for energy efficiency, but it does introduce building electrification. Under that scenario, the GHG reductions would be approximately double. And with that, I'll turn it back to
Sir,
Mr.
real
Dunn.
quick on that slide.
Sure.
If you can go back, Ann, sorry. Thank you. What is the residential surcharge under both those plans?
Okay, our
Proposed.
current residential surcharge for an average customer is $6 a month. Under the 2023 scenario, over the next 3 years, it would grow to $21 a month. If we go to the middle scenario, it will grow to $30 a month.
And that's without, I guess, what was it? HB 1035, which was the Empower bill from last year passing, correct? That is just how the program is now, without that conversion plan.
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry, yep, you're on the right side. So similar to what Mr. Case laid out, PEPCO and Delmarva Power also have increasing costs for the 2023 scenario. So approximately for PEPCO, it's about 501.2 million, and that also includes the DHCD funding. And then for Delmarva Power, it's 166.6 million. For PEPCO, it's about a 45% increase in current costs. And it does, as Mr. Case noted, have a substantial impact on the residential and commercial bills. Go to the next slide. Thank you. So similarly to what was presented for BG, you can see the results of the 2023 scenarios at the top for both PEPCO and Delmarva Power. And then the middle scenario, which includes electrification, you see the increasing costs with that added electrification scenario for both BP and PPL and PEPCO. Good, then next slide. Thank you. So Mr. Case already laid a lot out in terms of the changing landscape in the Empower program and how there's some limitations created by the lighting changes and et cetera. And so those are items that will make it a bit more challenging for us to achieve the goals in the CSNA. With that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Case to talk about the program.
Real quick, ma'am, go back to slide. You don't have to go back to slides, Ann, but just on average, what are those residential? One more.
I don't have the dollar amounts. I just know that in terms of, and we can get that for you.
Is it 3.5x roughly?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
That's all I need.
Thank you.
All right, so to wrap up, the next several slides just lay out the types of programs that we offer to our residential and to our commercial customers. We have, we look across the industry. We utilize ICF, both companies do, as our implementation vendor. They're one of the leading companies in the space across the US. We look for best practices and the programs that generate the highest level of savings at the lowest possible cost and that resonate the most with our customers. So in the residential space, we have a total of 9 programs. These are mature programs. Most of them we've been operating for many years. We introduce new innovations in each cycle. and learn from those. And in many cases, they lead to new ongoing programs. So without going through each one, you can see on the next two slides, the 9 residential programs that we offer. And then if you'll flip to the commercial, we have a total of a dozen programs for both small commercial and large commercial and industrial alike. And those two are based on best practices across the country. I want to touch briefly on demand response programs. For our residential customers, we offer 3 different programs between BGE and the PHI companies. One that we call our Peak Rewards program, for example, where we give customers a smart thermostat in their home or a switch that controls their air conditioning on the peak days. We have another program that allows customers to choose their own thermostat, and they get annual bill credits for being in that program that just slightly bumps up their thermostat on the hottest days of the summer. And then third, we're implementing a flexible load management program. We call that our Smart Energy Rewards program. That's more behavioral in nature. Similarly, we have demand response programs for our commercial programs. And then increasingly, we're looking at rate-based programs, time of use rates. We offer that for our electric vehicle customers. For example, I drive an EV. If I charge up at night, I can get a 40% savings in the cost of power because that's what it costs as a discount in the wholesale market. One more slide. Just a few other things. You know, we view we're proud of our programs. We've gotten really high customer satisfaction results through those programs. We are always looking to design them in a way that meets our customers where they are. We offer multilingual program offerings, Spanish, Korean, and other languages. We're often engaged with communities and various events. We do a lot in the EV space, and that's an area where we're growing. Heat pump water heaters, another new technology that's increasingly popular. So trying to look at what programs have the most value to our customers. And then finally, to close out, just a look at the regulatory calendar ahead of us. All the utilities statewide filed their programs on August 1st. The commission had given us an order earlier in the year telling us exactly what types of scenarios they wanted each utility to file. And then intervening parties, these are 5 of the many parties that are weighing in. They're offering comments about those filings, and they're recommending which scenario they think is appropriate for each utility. We have 4 days of hearings coming up in early November, and then typically we would see a commission order somewhere in the last week or so of December for programs then that will begin on January 1st. So with that, we thank you for your time, and Morgan and I are happy to answer any questions.
Yep, quick, go ahead, Delegate Pippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you mind going back a couple slides to the one with the 500%? Can you explain that who that 500% goes to? Or who does that 500% impact?
Yeah, that's all of our business customers. On average, they will see a 500% increase. So a Schedule G customer, which would be, that's our largest group of commercial customers. Those are small and medium-sized businesses. The average surcharge, if I do it on an annual basis today, it's a $200 annual surcharge that will grow to $1,200 as proposed.
And the 227, that's not going to big business. Those are going to individual residential customers?
That's correct.
So what I'm trying to understand is, so I'm on the public service website here, and it says Empower Maryland. And the first thing it says is the Maryland General Assembly has previously declared energy efficiency to be among the least expensive ways to meet the growing electricity demands of the state. But you come in and tell us that everyone's rates are going up between 227 and 500%. So I'm just trying to understand. I'm not a math guy, you know what I mean? So I'm trying to understand how that computes.
Mr.
Yeah,
Case, real quick, these are proposed rates, right?
They are proposed
So
rates. They've
that is not the
been
PSC is approved. That is what BG&E, or excuse me, Exelon has proposed.
Yeah, exactly. So what I would say is that all of the programs that we file have to be cost effective. There's a extensive body of work called EM&V, evaluation, measurement, and verification, that goes into, are the programs delivering more benefits to customers? And the benefits, historically, they were, hard financial. If you put in a more efficient heat pump, is it reducing your energy bill more than the cost of the investment in that heat pump? Today, that measure has expanded. It now includes environmental benefits. So if we're reducing carbon and we look at the societal cost and value of carbon, that goes into the calculus as well. But the net effect of that is about $1.50 of customer benefits for every dollar of investment. That's one of the key metrics the commission looks at in deciding whether or not to authorize a program.
So in other words, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, although your rate may go up 227% hypothetically, don't worry because you're helping the environment.
Yeah, I mean, we're not excited that the rates are going up by this level, but at the same time, we are delivering more savings to our customers than the cost of the program. Clearly, there's a big debate about the right way to recover costs that may or may not be adjudicated in this upcoming proceeding, but yeah, it's going to be a hard message. There's no doubt for some customers are going to see that surcharge, which is a line item on the bill, and they're going to react to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Aaron's.
You gotta help me out. I'm worse than him with math. If I live in District 36 and I got some relatively poor counties where, you know, median income's maybe $80,000 for a family of four. And they have maybe a $350, $400 electric bill today. What does this do to them? Can you give me an idea?
Yeah, so it's not, this is not a percentage increase on the overall bill. It's a percentage increase on the $6 line item on that bill. So that $6 line item over the next 3 years, if our programs were approved as filed, that $6 monthly amount would go up and it would either reach $20 or $30 by 2026, depending on which scenario the commission were to authorize.
But the cost per kilowatt's the same. Is that what you're saying then? Cost?
Well, the cost per kilowatt moves up and down based on, all the utilities in Maryland, we go out to auction to buy power 4 times a year. And so that's a competitive marketplace. We've seen this year, for example, the cost per kilowatt hour has dropped in half in the wholesale market from where it was last year. So prices are moving up and down in both gas and electric commodity markets, sort of independent of what we're doing with Empower Maryland. But maybe one other example I could offer to help illustrate what we see as the value of these programs. Since we started 15 years ago, the average customer on our electric system today uses 20% less kilowatt hours each month. That goes to energy affordability. On the gas side, it's been about a 15% reduction. So that's over 15 years, but it's been a steady reduction in usage, and that does help from an affordability standpoint, even when the surcharge may be going up.
Okay, so these fees and incentives, where do they come from? These savings that you talk about, you have rebates and incentives, where do they come from?
Yeah, so these are programs that are administered by the utilities or by the Department of Housing and Community Development. So the utilities lay out the money, we make the investments, we provide the rebates to customers, we administer the programs, we have cost to do that. The utilities recover the cost through that surcharge, the Empower Maryland line item.
So the rebates and incentives come from ratepayers, is that right?
They are funded ultimately by ratepayers.
All by ratepayers.
Yes.
I guess I like that, except now you talked a little bit about some of the cost here where the higher template to where we have to be our requirements to get to cleaner energy. How much does that affect these numbers?
Yeah, there's no doubt that as the savings targets get higher and higher each year, we've been at 2% annual savings target for the last 8 or 9 years, I would say, as the annual target. By 2027, we're going to be at 2.5% per year. Some of the bread and butter, the lowest cost programs that we've counted on for the last 15 years, we won't be able to count on those programs anymore. So it drives deeper retrofits, which are more costly, more expensive, but they do produce long-term savings for customers. So that is part of the dynamic.
I guess the long-term savings thing really gets me because we've been long-term with this, and I'm spending more and more than I ever have spent on energy. And now I'm watching potentially my numbers go up even higher for what I live with. And what we're doing is we're destroying the people in the $80,000 a year bracket, or you're just taking care of all the people that do and can't afford this, and you're hitting them so hard that we cover those costs. And I'm suggesting maybe these higher targets that we talk about, are they reasonable in your opinion?
Well, Maryland has set the most.
Are they reasonable in your opinion?
They're reasonable in the context of the aggressive climate goals that we have set as the state, which BGE and PHI are supportive of. And to get to those aggressive targets, we're going to have to make these sort of investments.
So if we would lessen our targets to something more realistic, not taking away from clean energy, we all want to get there. Would that impact these things?
The targets and the program investments are clearly linked. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yep. I just think it's it may be technical, but it's an important distinction is that rates aren't going up. It's the surcharge that is tied to Empower is going to go up. And so I think that is it might be pretty technical, but that is different than saying rates are going to go up. Delegate Charkoudian.
Mr. Chair, yeah, that was one of the clarifications because I am very concerned about rates. I'm concerned about surcharges going up and making sure that they're cost effective. But there's a very big difference between $10 going to $25, which is still matters on a bill, as opposed to $800 going to, $1,500. Like those are very different numbers. So I do think that's an important clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a couple of questions, and this gets to this question about where we invest. And some of this might be for the PSC, which I think we may be hearing from, but I'll ask you where we invest and how you figure the cost benefit analysis. Because I think one of the issues is if we're saving, I don't see the peak shaving on here, but there's one of them that had the peak shaving on there. And we're measuring the value to customers. Where in that do we have the ability to, or can you talk about where we actually would see a savings to customers that would come from, for example, not needing a peaker plant, shutting down a peaker plant, not needing to build another one, not needing transmission, avoiding transmission investments, avoiding distribution costs. Are you able to talk about how avoidance of those costs are part of the cost benefit process in this, and then how the avoidance of transmission, distribution costs, peaker plants shows up as savings on an electric bill?
Yes, those avoided costs, so to speak, are definitely a major part of the cost benefit calculation that is done by the utilities, and that is also done by the independent evaluator for the commission. So we look at avoided energy purchases, and there's a forecast of what current and future energy prices are going to be. And then we look at avoided capacity purchases. So if we reduce the peak demand, that's less capacity that has to be bought from PJM in the annual capacity auctions that take place. So those avoided cost savings are in fact the largest component that goes into the EM&V. Societal benefits are another one, as I mentioned. So all of those go in. How does the customer see it? I mean, that's the tricky part about this, right? The surcharge is visible. The savings, there's no line item on your bill that says, okay, your surcharge is $12, but your savings are $20. So when I tell you that the average customer is using 20% fewer kilowatt hours each month, and for example, the average BGE bill is about $120 a month. Well, if you didn't have that 20% savings, you could do the math and see how much higher the bill would be absent those programs. So it can be calculated, but it's not easily visible to most customers.
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing for us to be able to conceive of, because it's individual customers who get the rebate who potentially benefit, but it's also all customers if we're able to shave the peak by enough that we're avoiding some major other investment.
Yeah, and in fact, that is how the calculations are done. It's not done for the individual customer
okay,
putting
gotcha.
in the measure. It's done for customers as a full class. Are they benefiting above and beyond the costs?
Okay, so I have sort of two related, one related question to that and then a second question. So demand response, Charles and I were talking about this on the way over here. I just want to make sure I understand it. When you use demand response, you sell that into PJM and then pass that savings on. Is that part of Empower, or is that something separate that's happening from Empower?
It's part of Empower. So the dollars get credited dollar for dollar as a reduction to the Empower surcharge.
So in theory, if you do more with demand response, we could increase savings without having to increase the Empower surcharge. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, like all programs, demand response programs have a cost, right? So if you're signed up for the thermostat program, that customer can save anywhere from $50 to $100 per year, depending on what level of adjustment to the thermostat they're willing to take. There are other programs that are more behavioral. We give customers notice, say tomorrow's going to be a peak day, you reduce your usage, you get a credit. So there are costs to that, but yes, the benefits are greater than the costs.
So you aggregate that, you sell it to PJM. Does all the money go back to the customers, or do you get some of that beyond administrative costs to do that?
We don't get any of that. 100% flows back
Goes
to
back.
the customers.
Okay, but the cost that you would have to take out of Empower surcharge in terms of a capital cost would be like the thermostat that you've got to put in someone's house to make that happen.
Yes.
Okay, so thinking about $800 million towards transmission, bringing in energy to Brandon Shores area, how much demand response is like being used in that constrained zone right now, and how much potential do you think there is to increase demand response in that constrained zone? And a related question that you may or may not know the answer, but y'all can get back to me on, is when you need that peaker plant, the peak load in that constrained zone, do you actually use the full 1,250 or 1,300 megawatts that's there? Or could a solution that's like 500 or 1,000 megawatts solve that problem instead of having to replace the full 1,250 or 1,300 or whatever that plant is?
Yes.
Did you get that part A, B, C, and D?
Most of it, I think. Let me know if I missed part of it. So, Brandon Shores serves Central Maryland, right? It's right in the heart of our service territory.
Right.
It serves a broad area. The 1,300 megawatts is such a large number, and trivia, that was my first job at the company when I started here 40 years ago. I worked at the Brandon Shores plant, which is now retiring. That plant is such a large peak capacity. It doesn't generate a lot of energy because it's only dispatched a small amount of the time. But on a peak day, on a December 25th, like we had this last year when it was really cold in this region, and other days like that, it's critical to have that capacity.
But can I just, that is actually my question. Is it critical to have 1,300 megawatts, or would it be critical to have 800 and that's all we have there? So that's what we have to dispatch.
If you had 800 megawatts of demand response, the problem with demand response is people are willing to adjust their thermostats for a few hours, or they're willing to postpone their electric vehicle charging for a few hours. If you get a 3, 4, 5 day cold snap where Brandon Shores is running around the clock for 5 days, you're not going to cover that through demand response. So it's really great at shaving the peaks. But the second point I want to make is today, our demand response is mostly a summertime program, right? It's reducing air conditioning load. And we know we're going to convert from being a summer peaking utility to a winter peaking utility. Some of the models are saying in the next 3 to 4 years. So we have got to reinvent our demand response program.
Correct. That's why I'm asking these questions.
Year-round savings. And some of the results today are year-round. When I talked about the 690 megawatts, that includes, when you put in a more efficient heat pump or, cooktop or anything, that's lowering both peak demand and annual demand, and we count that as well. But it would be very difficult to replace a large, peaking plant like that with demand response.
Okay, I think I have a lot more detailed questions, but I'm going to follow up so other people have a chance. Let me just ask this last question. You asked, you said something about the front of the meter, the voltage for efficiency savings that's in
Yes.
front of the meter. You're limited now to only 20% of that. You can still do more, 20% of Empower being that. You can still do more of that. You just have to put it in your regular capital project, or put it in a distribution system planning project, or something other than, it's not that you can't maximize the efficiency of that system. You just
Yeah,
can't
in
charge
fact,
it towards
we will
Empower.
operate it at the same level. None of those costs are in the Empower Maryland
Okay.
surcharge because it's front of meter. So the program's going to operate
Okay.
like it always has. We're just going to count only a small portion of it going forward.
Got it. Thank you.
Delga Fraser Hidalgo.
Okay, good. So a couple of questions. When we talk about demand response and time of use, is there any conversation about coupling time of use with storage, like residential and commercial storage? And are those conversations, have they yielded any kind of opportunity to shave off those peaker issues? And particularly when you were talking about, the 3 or 4 days, if you have those working in conjunction with each other, has there been conversations about what that might look like?
I would say we're still in an investigative stage on how we can use demand response, time of use rates, managed charging. Some of these programs are actively before the commission now. So, we'll see how that plays out. But we got federal funding from the Department of Energy to do a managed charging program with electric vehicles. And as we look forward to more and more electric vehicles, that's going to be a large part of the peak load that we have to manage. So driving, I'm in that program as an example, right? I'm one of the several thousand customers that do that. If I allow the utility, I can put in a time, I need my car fully charged by 6 a.m. And between 9 a.m. and 6 a.m., BGE will diversify the charging load. So if you had 500,000 cars, you don't want them all like turning on right at 9 p.m. because then you create a peak at 9. So you spread it out over the whatever that is, 9 hours of overnight charging and make sure it's ready by the time. So I think between rate programs, technology programs, behavioral programs, that's going to be all part of the reinvention. I do think batteries play into that as well. There are projections that PJM has done that says in the long run, we're going to see periods like 10 a.m. to noon, where we've got so much excess solar generation. That's when we're going to want to put load on the system to be able to utilize that excess generation. So this is going to evolve a lot, I think.
Those are a lot of variables, but I guess, one of my questions, besides the transition to EV charging and that increased, as well as just electrification, is the storage piece. Vermont has a program that is doing a lot of backup, very aggressive. I think it's maybe similar to our Empower Maryland program. And I'm wondering whether there's conversations that are had to help with all of those variables, all of those issues, all at the same time, including potentially residential or commercial storage.
Yeah, so the commission actually, I'm sure many of you are aware, has a pilot program. And so we've had a variety of different programs for Delmarva and Pepco. And again, as Mr. Case noted, we're learning obviously from all the different technology, and the technology is changing. But for example, in Delmarva Power, we have a neighborhood, the Elk Neck neighborhood, where we put batteries in, I think, 100 homes. And not only was there benefits from using the storage for peak shaving, but there's also been benefits from resiliency perspective if there is an outage. But to your point, I think it's more about how is it all going to work in concert together. And I think we're still learning, but I think the commission has many opportunities in front of them to combine what is under the PC 44 primarily umbrella that we're learning from those various technologies and ways to use them.
I would also submit that having that residential storage in a variety of areas instead of just one area is actually a security benefit for the grid as well. But with that said, I guess my next and my only follow-up, I only have one, just one question. And that is, based on Delegate Arndt's and Delegate Pippi's extreme consternation of that surcharge going up. So my question to you is, should anybody else be paying for this besides the ratepayers? Why is it just the ratepayers that seem to be on the hook for all of this? I mean, everybody's very upset about it. I'm very upset about it, but I mean, the fossil fuel industry has been knowing that what they've been doing is going to cause this for the last 50 years. And like, should they not be paying for some of this too? No, they're not.
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer to that is ratepayers are the beneficiaries of the Empower programs. It's natural that they are the ones that cover the costs of the program. I think there are other impacts in the wholesale generation market, like you talk about fossil fuel generators and the price signals that occur there. That's in the wholesale market, but at the state regulated level, we're administering energy efficiency programs that benefit our customers, and those programs are paid for by our customers.
Okay, I'm going to let it go there. Thank you.
Delegate Weibel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we have another December 25 and you couldn't meet demand, what happens?
Well, we're going to do everything in our power to ensure that doesn't happen. Although we don't, we're not in the generation sector anymore, right? So we're responsible for transmission and distribution and making sure that we can do our part of it. But we certainly support policies at the PGM and the wholesale level that ensure a reliable market. PGM, as they design their wholesale capacity procurements, and they do this generally 3 years ahead. So there's plenty of time for planning and to make sure you have sufficient resources. If they don't get enough resources, they have supplemental auctions they can go to. So that's really under the jurisdiction of FERC and the PGM grid to manage that. But worst case, if we didn't have enough power, and we've seen this happen in a few other states, they've had to go to short-term rolling blackouts as a means of dealing with the shortfall.
And define short-term?
What I typically see a rolling blackout. So neighborhood A may be without power for 30 minutes, and then it shifts to neighborhood B, and it's sort of rolling through the area until the two are back in balance. Typically, PGM is targeting a 15% reserve margin. So if they need X amount of peak load, they'll procure resources to add up to 15% more than that. Now, we saw in Texas when there were extreme freezing and some of the plants didn't work and some of the gas production was impacted. We saw in PGM in this most recent cycle that some of the generation that was paid to be there wasn't there. And so that's something that PGM and FERC are looking at very closely.
Okay. So getting back then to the Empower program and the surcharge growth. So if we didn't have Empower, what would be the impact on rates? Does anyone know the answer to that?
Yeah, I think if we didn't have Empower, then, presumably we would have higher loads. Customers would not have made the investments in energy efficiency that has occurred over the past 15 years since the Empower bill first passed in 2008. And the impact of higher load, higher demand is generally higher prices. So consumers would be using more, their bills would be higher, and rates would be higher.
But you don't know by how much?
I know that we've seen a 20% savings in average usage. So that to me is a proxy for what, how much higher bills would be, but you can't say precisely because you'd sort of be constructing an alternate reality, what forms of generation would be out there to meet that higher demand if we had not invested in energy efficiency. So I don't think anyone could say precisely, but if you ask me for a ballpark, that would be my number.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Case and Ms. O'Donnell. So last year, the chair had a bill on Empower, and it was a conversion bill that essentially changed it from electrification to greenhouse gases, right? And there are numerous emails that I have all pulled up on my desktop from Exelon that say that bill particularly is going to essentially 6x in some instances, but we'll take 3.5x the Empower surcharge, right? And it turns out, based on your last filing, that doesn't even seem to be true because that bill didn't pass. And I guess what I'm getting at, that bill will be back. And I want to know what Exelon's rub with that bill is. And is there going to be any consternation around this thing setting the surcharge off? Because it doesn't seem like, based on what you filed and what you've provided last year, that those two things don't sync. There are other bills that have passed in here that have definitely raised the surcharge, no doubt about it. But it doesn't seem like the conversion raises the surcharge. So I just want to know before we go into the session, because nobody looks forward to January more than me after this, what is going to be the rub?
I think that might actually be a better question for me and for Ms. Clace. Okay, thank you. So I would describe our position a little differently on that legislation. And what I want to say first is that I think when I look at that bill, there were many more places where the stakeholders agreed than disagreed. So what I hope is that in advance of the next session, we can all get together and align our positions on legislation to move the policy forward and not get stuck on the very few places where we disagree. But the way I would describe our position about the surcharge is that the bill was locking into what we think is a policy position that helps to drive that increase. And so for one, we were asking you to take the opportunity to prevent the increase and certainly not to put into statute one of the factors that drives that increase. And so, I think that's more how I would describe our position.
Well, just to be clear, right? Like we're talking about climate solutions now, that put into statute the drive in the increase. This just converted that number essentially. So the increase is in statute. It's happening.
So respectfully, Mr. Chairman, I would disagree. I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're pointing to in the Climate Solutions Now Act is a suggestion that we would move to greenhouse gas emissions reduction instead of kilowatt hour reductions. And we agree that that's the right thing to do. I think that when we looked at how the cost of the programs would grow based on the new targets, what we were more concerned about is that if you take a model to expense those costs, that you would see higher bill impacts. And the commission had already ruled on that. And they have the flexibility to change their mind based on the facts that are before them. But if you put into statute that they must recover costs in a specific way, then when they see the numbers, they can't change their mind. So that's the policy in particular that I'm referencing, that we were hoping that you would address to prevent the increase in bill impacts, but certainly would not have supported locking in inflexibility to address those bill impacts.
So it's not the increase from the 2 to the 2.5, which will be converted, right, from Climate Solutions Now over to what the Empower Act was, or whatever the heck it was called last year, right? It's more that balance that we're about to pay down. And then frankly, I mean, the debate is going to surround the interest that's on it. I mean, essentially that's what we're getting at here, right? You want to keep that and charge interest on it and let it accrue for however long you want to let it accrue. And eventually, that day never comes due and you're able to recover 10% interest on that balance and be able to, for lack of a better term on this instance, pay it out to your shareholders.
So, Mr. Chairman.
That's what's happening.
Well, no, I mean, I'm looking for the areas where we can work together on this, but I guess the way that I would answer your question, I might ask my colleague to join me in this conversation. Specifically, what we were referencing is the bill impacts, right? And we were trying to structure programs, especially as they are becoming more challenging as we get away from the low-hanging fruit, to structure them in a way so that our customers don't see that shock on their bill that we've been talking about thus far today. Is it true that when we amortize the programs that there is a return to the company? That is true. And we never hid from that.
No, I know.
But that's true when you mortgage your house instead of paying cash, or when you finance your car instead of paying cash.
But there's an end date to that.
There's an end date to these.
And there's no end date to this.
Well, that's not true, sir.
Well, okay, besides 2029, which the PSC put in, and it's probably going to get extended.
Well, I want to make sure that I'm being clear. The way that this program has been discussed, and I hate to bring it up myself, but I will, it's like it's a credit card that you use one time and you max it out and you pay the minimum payment forever, right? Or for many years. That's not the case with this. This is more like you go and you buy something of value 1 year and you pay it off over 5 years, but every year you get something new in value. So the reason that it was continuing was not because you're paying on the same programs into perpetuity, but because every year you're getting new award-winning programs and cutting the usage across the service territory. And in each case, paying that off over 5 years.
We definitely disagree on this, but that's fine. I mean, in the end, they're never going to pay the balance off, and the structure that we're going to, they're going to pay it off at the end of the year. That's how it's going to go. I mean, I'm just being completely blunt and honest with you. So, and that is the direction that we're heading. So here's my other question. On that balance, percentage wise, right? Knowing that, let's just say right now, 2029 is the end date because nothing has changed. May change soon in the near future, may change during session, but 2029 is the balance. This is 2023. How much of that balance has Exelon that they've had, how much have they by percentage paid off or I guess recovered through the surcharge?
Yeah, I don't know if I fully understood the question, but I would say each year's program, and I'm talking about the way it's worked in the past, right? Because the commission has ordered a different form of cost recovery starting next year. But let's say for the dollars that we invested in 2023, customers would pay for those over a 5-year period of time. And by 5 years from now, it would be done. That piece would be paid off.
And
It'd
what
be a
I'm
new
talking,
set of programs in, 2022 or 2024 that they
so
would have.
I'm
their
talking
own
about the
5 years.
$900 million balance.
Do
That's
you
what I'm
wanna-
discussing,
Do you want to know
right?
what our balance is right now?
Yeah, I mean, that would be,
Sure.
yeah, that, I didn't know
Sure.
you knew that number.
So Pepco Maryland, they are currently at $182 million.
And what were they last year?
That I don't have, but I can tell you the current balance right now as of 9/30 was, well, as of September 30th was $182 million for Pepco, and for DPL was approximately 66 million.
Okay, if you can get me the numbers from last year, then,
Sure.
I mean, all I care about is that it's evenly paid off. That's really what I'm trying to get at, right? So, by the time you hit 2029, Pepco is not going to slam their customers. I shouldn't do that because that's super, well, no, I mean, slam their customers with $182 million. And all of a sudden that day, everybody's freaking out because they got hit with the entire balance all at once. Because I know we're all going to get calls on that day.
Sure.
All right.
And
Well, thank you all so much.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Next up, we have Tom Dennison, Emmanuel Geraldo, Joshua McClelland, and Scott Waitlervich. I apologize.
Presentation.
Go ahead, you can brief one ready.
I will take the lead. Good afternoon. My name is Scott Waitlervich. I'm with Columbia Gas of Maryland. Appreciate the opportunity just to briefly take a few moments to talk about the Empower legislation that was introduced this past session and propose some ideas for 2024 if you're going to consider that legislation again. So Columbia Gas of Maryland is a small company serving 34,000 customers in Western Maryland, Allegheny, Garrett, and Washington counties. So when Empower was first introduced, House Bill 1035, we supported it. And as you know, it was changing the focus from energy efficiency to greenhouse gas reduction. But the bill was amended significantly at the end of March by the committee. We had major concerns with what transpired in the amendments. The main ones were the creation of a 1.8% mandated greenhouse gas reduction goal, but specifically, it directed how we could achieve that reduction. And it mandated that we had to achieve that reduction by 80% being quote unquote behind the meter, or really from a customer's home or business. That left us very little flexibility in order to achieve the goal. And we intend to achieve that greenhouse goal or greenhouse gas reduction goal, but it can't come from prescriptive behind the meter programs mandated like that was in the legislation. For a small company like Columbia, we need more flexibility to achieve that goal rather than just a one-size-fits-all approach. We would advocate that legislation, if it was going to be introduced again in 2024, recognize that each gas company is significantly different in Maryland based on its geographic service territory, as well as its size and different customer bases. Any proposed program needs to be cost-effective for the ratepayers. The Public Service Commission has the knowledge and the expertise to review and approve new utility-created programs that are appropriate, balanced, cost-effective for the ratepayers. Columbia believes it can and will be part of Maryland's clean energy future, addressing climate issues and providing solutions. But we, again, have to have that flexibility to accomplish reasonable greenhouse gas reduction goals. Any newly imposed or any newly proposed Empower program must be designed with these parameters in mind. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Manny Geraldo on behalf of Washington Gas. Josh McClellan was unavailable today, but I am joined by John Richards, who is our lead energy efficiency strategy analyst. And he just has some brief comments about Empower and what we're doing with Empower. And we look forward to working with the committee next session.
Thank you, many members of the committee. Yes, my boss, Josh, he apologized. His wife got COVID, so thought it was best not to attend today. So yes, I'll just provide a brief history for Washington Gas. We've been doing Empower programs since 2015, since the PSC authorized us to start doing programs. We offer it, to residential, commercial, low-income customers. We've provided over $29 million in rebates to over 75,000 customers in that time. Over about 15 million in energy cost saved by customers, approximately 54 million in metric tons reduction of metric carbons. And yeah, the company looks forward to continuing to deliver our energy efficiency programs to our customers via the Empower programs, and hopes we can have constructive discussions and engagement with stakeholders and legislators regarding the future of our programs. So that's all I have at this time.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Tom Dennison. I'm Vice President of Government and Public Affairs for Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative. Appreciate the committee's indulgence today to allow SMECO to give a little background about we're about 170,000 member not-for-profit electric cooperative in Southern Maryland. We serve Charles, St. Mary's, Calvert, and a portion of Prince George's County, and we've been participating in the Empower Maryland program since its inception in 2008. And we've made significant strides, and we're very proud of that. We were recognized, we met our 2% reduction goal just recently. And I'm not as eloquent as Mr. Case was about explaining all of the benefits and programs associated with Empower Maryland. So I won't even attempt that, but I did want to provide the committee somewhat of a reference for how our filing on August 1 will impact our residential customer members in Southern Maryland. We use an average customer to be one who would use about 1,200 kilowatt hours a month. And as the committee is probably aware, in Southern Maryland, we don't have a lot of gas infrastructure, so there's more electric usage for heating and cooling, which is the main driver for electricity usage. So for our average customer currently is about 1,200 kilowatt hours a month, and the Empower Maryland surcharge is around $11. The filings that we just made, similar to our utility folks who were here earlier, we have the status as usual scenario, a middle scenario, and a very maximum scenario. And under those plans, we'd be looking at the surcharge going up from $11.70 a month, which is our current standard, to about $20.92 a month. And then under the most aggressive scenario, we'd be at $29.20 per residential customer. The message here is pretty simple from Southern Maryland Electric's perspective. We have been very consistent in front of this committee and over in the Senate about cost impacts of any legislation, whether it was the Climate Solutions Now Act that put in place the new greenhouse gas reduction goals, to the RPS. I mean, we've been here numerous times talking about those programs, but we just kind of urge the committee to keep those costs in mind. And those are the arguments we'll be making in Baltimore at the Public Service Commission when those hearings begin in November. The last thing, and Mr. Chairman, if I may, we are working on, I think, a piece of information that'll be helpful to the committee. We're doing a analysis on what we're calling the energy burden for our customer members in Southern Maryland. So what we have found, and I'd like to have the hard data to share with the committee, is that many times low income members typically have higher electric bills. So when you have a higher electric bill already, and then the surcharge is going up, this is the kind of information that we wanted to share with the Public Service Commission and obviously share with the committee because we think it's important when, when we move forward with these types of legislative items and certainly continuing Empower Maryland. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll take any questions.
Tom, real quick, the model that the PSC went to of expensing everything by the end of the year, that is already the model that SMECO now follows, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and what is your, we'll say the big balance, what is SMECO's share of it right now?
I was gonna get that information, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, I don't have it. I'll give it to you right after this, but I think we've been consistent in saying that those costs should be recovered in a surcharge rather than a rate base.
Okay, I guess what I'm curious about, right, is between now and 2029, that it is, like I said, roughly evenly distributed amongst those years, so that let's just say it's $100 million in 2029, they don't get slammed with a $100 million bill spread amongst the ratepayers. To the other gentleman, the other three of you, I hear your concerns. What is your alternative proposal? And, I'm not looking for that maybe necessarily right now, but if you can't just come in here and say like, oh, we need, we don't like this. I need to know what the alternative is and have a plan for that.
I think that from Columbia's perspective, again, we supported House Bill 1035 in its original drafting. It gave the Public Service Commission the flexibility to review any program that was submitted to them. I think that's where Columbia would be, that we'd rather, instead of having specific goals and targets and how to do it, give the commission flexibility to approve a program that's cost effective for our customers.
I would have other conversations and be prepared to offer an alternative.
We will certainly look at that, but
All right.
just, and
I got you. So, okay. All right. Any other question? Oh, Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, is what I meant to say. For the gas, for the question about gas and you're talking about, I think what you said earlier was that your concern was about the fact that it had to be behind the meter. Was that what you were saying? So I'm trying to understand where you would get greenhouse gas reduction. I mean, I'm concerned about that in general, because there's been all this conversation about where are we taking ratepayer money, where are we investing it? And part of the beauty of Empower, flawed though it may be, is we're taking ratepayer money, we're investing it directly back into ratepayers' homes, so individuals get the benefit, and then there's this broader benefit to everybody because of the peak shaving. I'm trying to understand how any of that works with gas.
well, I mean,
Like even justifying why gas companies are in Empower to some extent, honestly, but like, I don't understand how any of that would work and how any of it would work in front, how you would take them, use it for investments in front of the meter to.
well, yeah, I mean, currently Columbia is not involved with Empower. That we were small enough that the commission did not.
Understand that, yeah.
Right. So I mean, from our perspective, having the ability to do much more of this, in front of the meter using innovative technologies, whether it's renewable natural gas or hydrogen, we think we can accomplish significant goals using renewable natural gas or hydrogen to meet, ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals.
So like the most costly replacement for gas, renewable natural gas and hydrogen, as opposed to electrification, would be cost effective to decrease for an energy efficiency program. I'm just not following. I understand that you want to use renewable natural gas and hydrogen. And I'll just say, like, I feel like that's something of a non-starter in this conversation, but putting that aside for a second, I don't understand how that even fits into Empower. I mean, I'm sort of getting at the chair's question of like, what is your plan if you're going to come and ask for something else? Because that's not even renewable natural gas. That doesn't even, it's not using less. I mean, it's not an efficiency based clean, right? Because Empower doesn't pay for clean energy, right? If we were to pretend that renewable natural gas were sort of the replacement clean energy, Empower doesn't pay for clean energy. Empower pays for efficiency, and we want efficiency to lead to a decrease in greenhouse gas greenhouse gas reduction. So I'm just not following where your connection between efficiency, greenhouse gas reduction, customer cost benefit to customers kind of ties together.
Well, we view the proposed legislation as, again, changing the focus from energy efficiency to greenhouse gas reduction. So we viewed it as a greenhouse gas reduction program that we would then submit to the commission for approval.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if this is helpful as someone who's on the subcommittee that's working on this. I think that our view is not that it's straight up greenhouse gas reduction, because in that case, it could fund offshore wind. What it is it's an energy efficiency program based in people's homes for peak load reduction that also is going to be measured in its impact by greenhouse gas reduction. So to the extent that you want to present sort of an alternative that we would consider in response to the chair's interest, I would say those are the pieces that have to be there. It's not just a surcharge that then gets used for greenhouse gas reduction, you know, that we may agree or disagree on how you accomplish that.
Yeah, understand.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
All right, seeing Delegate Fraser Hidalgo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, I think this is to Tom. Does SMECO do smart metering?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. We followed the pilot program that was implemented by Baltimore Gas and Electric and Pepco. SMECO then kind of followed them, and we've been in full deployment now for the last probably 5 years.
How far are you away from having every complete deployment?
That's what I said. I'm sorry.
You're already.
Yeah,
at complete.
we
Okay.
have been fully deployed.
Thank you. That is very helpful. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And Mr. Chair, if I could, the remaining balance is 37 million on our Empower Maryland.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further questions, next we'll go to the PSC. Is Chair Hoover here? Oh, he's outside. Well, we noticed how fast you are. Everybody at home noticed how fast you are too, which was nobody. Chair Hoover, Lisa, good to see you. You can start whenever you're ready. You can bring everybody up. I think there's more than enough seats.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Fred Hoover, the recently installed Chair of the Maryland Public Service Commission. And with me, I have two of our commission advisors, the folks that work directly with us as we make the decisions that on the matters pending before us, John Burkowski and Ben Baker, along with Kathy Brewster and Lisa Smith, our legislative person. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben to discuss the Empower issues. There's a limit as to what I can say because this is a matter, as you probably heard, pending before the commission. So there's a limit as to the comments I can make on issues that are actually pending before us. Not to avoid answering your questions on this issue, but we will be making a decision in December and then probably be talking about this next year. With that, Ben?
Hello, thank you for having us. My name is Ben Baker. I'm a senior commission advisor. And so I've been asked basically just to give a procedural update on Empower, the process that we've gone through to get to where we are today, and to answer any questions that you might have about the process. So Empower has been a program for about 15 years focused on energy efficiency and demand response, originally created to help with reliability issues. How the program effectively operates is we give incentives or information to customers to either buy appliances that are more energy efficient or to change their behavior in how they use their energy. We are about to start a new cycle of Empower, as you just heard from the utilities for 2024 to 2026. We run 3-year cycles. During our 2021 to 2023 program cycle, we had a whole work group dedicated to what we thought the future of Empower would look like. And during that work group, a recommendation that was put forward was that we should shift the program to a greenhouse gas reduction goal to better align with our state's climate goals. And that was resulted in legislation that you did review last year. So the commission back in February of this year held a hearing thinking about what the future goals for Empower would look like with greenhouse gas reductions. During that hearing, we reviewed a study that had been put forward by some consultants reviewed through our work group process. And there were a range of outcomes that we could have pursued, but one of the big issues that came out of it was no one knew the cost of pursuing those greenhouse gas reductions through the Empower program. So the commission issued an order telling the utilities to produce 3 scenarios. All scenarios had to comply with the current law from the Climate Solutions Now Act in terms of energy efficiency reductions, but also to increasingly go after more and more greenhouse gas savings. Those plans were filed with us in August of this year. They have been reviewed by our staff, by the Office of People's Counsel, and by other interveners that have filed comments with us. And between November 6th and November 9th of this year, we'll be holding public hearings, which we would invite you to either attend or listen to through our YouTube channel. After that, the commission will deliberate and issue a decision by the end of this year on what we would like to see for the next 3 years of those programs. And so with that, as the chair mentioned, there is a limit to some of the things that we can discuss today about the pending issues before us. But that said, we are happy to answer any generic questions or procedural questions about Empower, and things that we can't answer, we will certainly get back to you on email. So thank you, and I'm open for questions.
Okay. Knew you were going to get that. Finger got itchy. Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this question is really important because I mean, all joking aside, I really share the concern folks have about ratepayer impact. The reason that I generally support Empower, although really feel like we need to have the cost benefit analysis on it, is because I do believe in the long term it saves ratepayers money. And I appreciate folks who are looking at bills and looking at numbers and saying, I don't see that because these numbers seem to be going up. And so I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about your internal analysis, and or if there's ways for us to get better information so people could see more clearly when we shave peaks in this way with this investment, this is the avoided cost, capacity, distribution, transmission, wherever, and this is how that might translate. Some of what the BG&E folks were sort of trying to say, but I'm wondering if you, since you actually have to make decisions based on that,
Right.
And if you can help us as a committee, not necessarily right this second, but with those kinds of numbers, so we could maybe better evaluate, and folks may have different ideas about this program if we could wrap our heads around that part of it.
Right. Yeah. And so thank you for that question. We have a whole team dedicated to evaluating the Empower programs and how cost effective they are. So in that cost effectiveness test, we are looking at things like avoided transmission cost, avoided generation cost, looking at societal benefits such as avoided greenhouse gases, and also looking at the cost of the programs. And so it's actually a pretty rigorous process that we have, whereby first the utilities, they will go ahead and they will pay an independent evaluator. So usually consultants who will come in and say, this is how cost effective we think it is. And then we, the commission, have our own individual who also checks what they're saying and saying if they agree or not agree with those cost effective savings. And then we get a report once a year. So like it's actually being filed, if not already filed, very soon, for what happened in the last year. So for we'll receive the 2022 cost effective results right now in October. So every year we will get an update on that. And so that is publicly available on our website. It doesn't maybe go into all the detail that you're hoping, and we can definitely, if there's a desire to make it more public in terms of the assumptions and what's being avoided, because it's usually the top line number of, it was 1.1 cost effective, which is just a generic thing that's not really talking about dollars, right? And so it's thinking about, but we have a whole team dedicated to that and looking at those programs every year, because one of the things about Empower is it should be cost effective. And so we are trying to pursue that and evaluate that as it goes through.
I think maybe my request is that before the next session, when we're gonna have these bills to look at again.
Yeah.
If you could come up with much more concrete examples of avoided hard costs.
Mhm.
What that might be, what that might mean for people's bills. And then I think this committee can do the cost benefit analysis of what that means. But I think it's hard when all anyone sees is the number on the bill going up and we don't get to see what the impact is.
Yeah, we can certainly do
That
that.
would be great. Thank you.
I think piggybacking off of that too, heading into next session, obviously you all have your ruling in December, and obviously you'll be able to talk a little bit more freely, Mr. Chairman, but what changes, overall changes do you want to see to the program too? Do we want to bring more people under the umbrella? Because right now we have people who are exempt and their customers aren't able to realize, the Empower savings. Obviously that discusses some of the examples like Delegate Charcuti wants to see, but some people, Chop Tank, for example, their customers don't take advantage of the program. So, just kind of thinking through a more comprehensive solution and what you all want to push forward, into the future and how we can incorporate that into the bill as we move into session. So look forward to having all those conversations and seeing Delegate Cherie Sample Hughes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your time and explaining all of this. I just have one question for you. As you were just explaining that your team looks at all of this comprehensively, and you said that you have an independent, there's an independent evaluator and then the PSC has their evaluator. So do you then meet in the middle of like a middle common ground of the final decision on where to go? Or is there a third party that comes in and make the decisions?
So so the commission is the final arbitrator of anything in this space, anything that's in front of it. So our evaluator, while he is not the commission, he obviously has a lot of weight. A lot of what is decided, yes, will be worked out amongst the work group members and work groups where they'll be going back and forth. And if they reach a compromise and everyone thinks it's good, well, that's fine. But if an issue needs to be arbitrated by the commission, we would certainly take that up. So I would say there isn't sort of they say one thing, we say the other, so we just generically accept an average. No, I mean, if people can't truly agree on something in terms of how the process should work, if that needs to be litigated by us, it would be taken up by the commission.
Okay, and this is me just not totally understanding everything, but so when you were explaining that this information is coming in now, would this be the first time you going through that particular process with this Empower that we're talking about? Does that make sense?
Let me break it up into a couple parts.
Sure.
So the process of our evaluator checking the evaluations is historical in nature. So it's always looking at what happened in the previous year, trying to understand how well that did. So that would be separate from this discussion of going into 2024 to 2026, which I think you heard a lot of from the utilities just now. So on that end, the utilities have presented their plans. They have an individual, they'll have, I'm assuming, contractors and a bunch of employees who have gone through and said, we think this is what it's going to cost, and this is how cost effective we think it's going to be. Then our technical staff, we have a staff of individuals who are dedicated to Empower. Actually, we'll check that. We also have the Office of People's Counsel, who is an independent group, but they're also going through those filings, and other interveners. Earth Justice is typically in front of us. Montgomery County has been an active participant. They will all look through these filings and come in front of us and say, should we believe what we're seeing? Here's what we think you should change. And then the commission needs to make that decision. And so that's separate from this evaluator I was just discussing. Though his information is public, so then we can look at it, and if they want that to inform the record, we certainly could, in terms of saying the utilities are saying it's this cost effective, but here's what happened historically. Why should I believe that? So so they're two distinct processes, though.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, seeing no further questions. Did you all want to touch on the storm utility storm restoration efforts?
Sure. Just briefly, some of you were here in 2011 when the General Assembly passed legislation authorizing the commission to take a more prescriptive involvement when it comes to utility resiliency and reliability. And so John Burkowski, who before he became a commission advisor was the chief engineer at the Public Service Commission, is going to give an overview on some of the activities we've done on an annual basis in reviewing the utilities practices on reliability and resilience. John?
Okay, thank you, Chair Hoover. Good afternoon. My name is John Borkowski, and I am a senior commission advisor. And again, my presentation is focused on utility reliability and resilience. The commission in itself, we have 5 commissioners, including a chair that oversee the agency. And these commissioners are appointed by the governor for staggered 5-year terms and are approved by the state Senate. 2 commissioners are attorneys, Chair Hoover and Commissioner Suchman. We also have Commissioner O'Donnell, who served 22 years in the House of Delegates, and Commissioner Barbe, who served 32 years in the House of Delegates. And Chair Hoover and Commissioner Richard are also former directors of the Maryland Energy Administration. Okay, regarding electric service reliability, Chair Hoover talked briefly about the Maryland Electric Service Quality and Reliability Act back in 2011. Well, per the Public Utilities Article 2-113, the Commission supervises and regulates public service companies to ensure their operation is in the interest of the public and promotes adequate, economical, and efficient delivery of utility services. And to that end, electric service quality and reliability is an important focus of the Commission. Pursuant to the Act, the Maryland Electric Service Quality and Reliability Act, the Commission established regulation in May of 2012 in a rulemaking proceeding number 43, otherwise known as RM 43. And various reliability standards and regulations were promulgated, and the utilities have to file annual reliability performance reports with the Commission pursuant to those regulations, with the first ones being filed in April 2013. Also, the reliability standards are continually reviewed and updated, with the current cycle of standards updated in March 2019, and we have a new cycle of standards that are going to take effect in 2024. Whenever we update our standards, we engage stakeholders such as utilities, PSC technical staff, the Office of People's Counsel, and we've even had some local jurisdictions like Montgomery County participate in work groups to develop regulation and standard proposals for the Commission. Okay, so while the original reliability standards were implemented in 2012, and again, these standards are reviewed on a 4-year cycle, they only apply to electric companies serving 40,000 or more customers, and that's pursuant to the Maryland Electric Service Quality and Reliability Act, which exempted small rural cooperative utilities and municipal electric utilities. The Commission reviews compliance with these standards annually, and the Commission has docketed case number 9353 for the purpose of annually reviewing these electric company reliability performance reports, inviting stakeholder comments on the reports, holding an annual hearing to consider the comments and recommendations, and if necessary, ordering corrective actions and improvement initiatives, such as launching work groups as appropriate. And since these first reliability reports were filed in April 2013, this past summer has marked a decade of these annual reviews. Okay, So as I get into my presentation a little bit further, I have some definitions I'd like to just cover. When evaluating reliability performance, the electric industry has developed standards for handling large events that are statistical outliers. In other words, if you have a very large multi-day storm that can lead to a large number of customer interruption hours, these particular days are statistical outliers, and we call them major event days. These days can be used for tracking utility resilience, which I'll demonstrate in a later slide. Also, we have reliability standards for each electric company for safety and SAIDI. And for SAIDI, defined as the total time customers on average did not have electric service each year, and it's measured in minutes. And we also have reliability standards for safety, which is a measure of how often customers on average experience an interruption each year. So following these industry best practices, our regulations for both safety and SAIDI standards exclude major event days because we want to remove these outliers when measuring the reliability of performance of the utilities, because they can have a large influence on the utility's reliability results in any given year, which may not give an accurate picture of the utility's reliability performance. So although we do remove them, we don't throw them away because these major event days are important for looking at how resilient a utility is, and I'll describe that later. Okay. Now I realize it's a very busy chart, and this is for 2022. It's the overall performance summary for the 11 reliability standards that we have in COMAR. So although this chart's somewhat busy, and I do not plan on discussing each of the reliability standards that are represented in the chart. However, I just wanted to show this to you because of the fact that it's the same scorecard that we used in the Commission's hearing this past summer for annual reliability performance. The standards are shown in the white cells, and the colored cells illustrate performance, with green indicating a standard was met and red indicating a standard was not met. I think at a high level, just the key takeaway from this chart is that the utilities did pretty well in calendar year 2022 in meeting the 11 reliability standards we have in COMAR, with only one company failing a standard. Now, when a company does fail a standard, they are required to file a corrective action plan. And this corrective action plan must be approved by the Commission. In some cases, a utility may be assessed a civil penalty depending on the nature of the standards violation. And one other takeaway, you know, while we had a great year in 2022 as far as compliance, we have never had, in the 10 years that we've been holding these hearings, we have never had a year where all the standards were met. But by comparison, we did also have one standard violation in 2021, and we had 3 standard violations in 2020. Okay, so I talked earlier about safety and SAIDI. Here's some performance trends, and again, safety and SAIDI are metrics that are used predominantly in the electric industry. When you look at these standards, you can see that there is some differentiation between the different utilities as far as their performance. Each utility has different standards that they must meet, and the Commission will look at their past reliability performance history. They'll look at their customer satisfaction with reliability performance and also willingness to pay for improved reliability performance. And these are from surveys. Customer surveys are conducted every 4 years. And the Commission will also consider the utility cost estimates to improve reliability performance when setting standards, among other things. So There is differentiation based on these factors, and the 2-year trend charts we're using here better illustrate trends than a 1-year chart, which may have variations that distort the trend. But as we can see from this chart, and again, SAIDI represents a total time customers on average did not have service each year measured in minutes. This chart illustrates that BGE, PEPCO, and Delmarva have made improvements in SAIDI over the last decade, with all 3 utilities having SAIDI less than 90 minutes in recent years, and SHMECO and Potomac Edison have had higher SAIDI by comparison, generally above 110 minutes. When we look at benchmarking data, first quartile, according to IEEE reliability surveys, is approximately 85 minutes. So we do have several of our utilities in first quartile with respect to SAIDI performance. When you look at SAIFI, and recall SAIFI represents how often customers on average experience an interruption each year. And this chart illustrates that BGE, PEPCO, Delmarva, and Potomac Edison have all have SAIFI less than 1 interruption per customer in recent years. And SHMECO has higher SAIFI by comparison. And again, with the benchmarking from the IEEE reliability surveys, generally first quartile is above, below 0.86. So we have several of our utilities in first quartile with SAIFI also. I'm going to transition to resilience. Up until now, we've been generally talking about general reliability, but when it comes to resilience, I indicated earlier that we use major event days and we exclude them from reliability trends, remove the statistical outliers. However, we still use them in measuring resilience. And resilience is basically just a measure of the ability of a system to withstand and recover from major unplanned service disruptions. And we have a concept also that's similar in some respects to major event days, but has a bright line definition, if you will. It's a major outage event. And a major outage event is events where 10% or more, 10% or 100,000 customers, whichever is less, of electric utilities, Maryland customers experience a sustained interruption of service, and restoration takes longer than 24 hours. And what we use major outage events for is if one of these is experienced during a year, you cross that threshold, utilities have to submit a report to the commission, which is then reviewed, and appropriate actions are taken if there are violations of standards. So the difference between major outage events and major event days, basically major event day has a lower threshold than a major outage event. For instance, in 2022, there were 5 major outage events from utilities, but there were 27 different major event days. And again, we measure and track resilience using a concept called SAIDI Med, which is really just the total time customers on average did not have service during a major event days. And it's a reliability metric, resilience metric that is gaining traction in the industry. So I'll illustrate that on the next slide. So as we can see from this slide with SAIDI Med, it was pretty high in 2018, but then relatively low from 2019 through 2021 before spiking again 2022. So I don't think we can really draw any conclusions that extreme weather is becoming more severe in Maryland in recent years based on just the 1-year uptick in 2022. However, 2023 to date, we have seen some severe weather. And I expect that once we analyze this data again, when we get the reports next April, we'll probably also see a higher level of SAIDI Med in 2023. So regarding 2023 weather, we've had 3 major outage events. If you recall, we had 5 in 2022. And we had thunderstorms, a series of thunderstorms. There was a thunderstorm on July 28th and another strong thunderstorm cells on July 29th. In that particular event, both SMECO and PEPCO exceeded the threshold for major outage events and have provided reports. We also had a very severe August 7th thunderstorm, primarily affecting BGE, and BGE accordingly provided a major outage event report. The July 28th to 29th thunderstorms, I should have mentioned that they involved about 200,000 outages statewide. And the August 7th thunderstorms was about 150,000 customers statewide. And that August 7th storm, BGE experienced about 120 of those 150,000 customer outages. Now, the engineering division performs an analysis. I'm talking about the PSC engineering division. They perform an analysis of each major outage event report and provide the results of their investigation, including recommendations to the commissions. Major outage event report filings are required 35 days after the end of restoration. And typically there are at least 2 rounds of discovery responses back and forth between the utilities and commission staff. Therefore, these investigations typically take about 3 to 4 months to complete. So we don't have the results from our engineering staff available, but they're expected later in Q4. Okay, and finally, with regards to resilience plans, I mentioned before that we update the cycle, our reliability standards every 4 years. Well, in this past cycle, we also introduced some new standards. We added a new regulation requiring that electric utility shall have resilience plans to prepare and recover from various utility defined credible disturbances. And these disturbances are anything that is thought to have the potential to lead to a large and widespread electric outage or loss of critical facilities essential for public health and safety. And in addition, our regulations require that utilities work with state and local jurisdictions to identify critical facilities in their plans. And the definition in COMAR of a critical facility is a list of electric system customers that are essential for public health and safety that require restoration priority is determined in consultation with state and local jurisdictions. And the effective date of this regulation is 2024. So in summary, we've made progress in the past decade improving reliability in Maryland, and we also have detailed processes that are ongoing to review utility reliability performance annually. And in addition, we have a review of major outage events. And at this point, I'm available for any questions.
Delegate Aaron's, sure. Okay.
Sure. For next session, where could we get a comprehensive, detailed report on what our policies as far as clean energy, what that had, how we have benefited since the inception? Like, Empower's been there since 2012. What have we paid for and what have we got for that? Meaning, our growth from, we need to get to 20%, 25%, whatever. Where would I find that information? Bless you.
So some of that information is on our website. Actually, we publish annual reports on some of this. So actually some of the information you were asking about, Delegate, is published on our website for Empower, where we have a running total of savings and cost. We also have other reports related to RPS standards. Now, if you're looking for a comprehensive one-stop shop, I don't think that exists currently, but we do have, for some of the questions that you're asking, for some of those costs, we do publish reports on various items every year.
If I wanted that kind of information, who would I go to?
You can send an email to me and we can get you that information.
So you and I could sit down and have a conversation on this whole gambit that I'm talking about, or just the pieces you're referencing?
Probably just the pieces I'm referencing, but we can have a conversation. If I don't know it, we have an agency of dedicated staff who can hopefully get to
There's
your
no real piece
questions.
of paper where everybody could get a look at it and say, this is over the last 10 years, we've done this, this is what we got.
I don't think we have that, but I can look. I think we have a 10-year report that we put out, but that's usually a forward-looking report. So I don't think we have a one-stop shop piece of paper, but I can talk to our technical experts and see what we have.
Thank you.
Yep, he looks very excited. All right, thank you so much. Appreciate you. And for our final panel today, we'll bring back up the Exelon folks, Ann Clace, Philip Pavala, Stephen Singh, and Mr. Charles Washington. And I'll remind you that you are the last panel for the day.
Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you in January.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate you.
Sorry. I hear you.
You don't even have to be seated to start briefing.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Hello again, Charles Washington here on behalf of BGE. Thank you all for hanging in there with us. I know it's been a long day. I'm joined by my colleague, Steve Singh, who is our Vice President of Electric Operations. He's not a lobbyist, but he's here at my request to talk about storm restoration. I'll kick it over to Ms. Clace to introduce the PHI panel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, and Clace here on behalf of Pepco and Delmarva Power. With me today, I have Mr. Philip Vavala. He is our Vice President of Gas and Electric Operations for Pepco Holdings. He is not a registered lobbyist, and he is here at my request to discuss PHI storm restoration efforts. I'll turn it over to you.
So thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the time of the day that this is, so I'll make my comments brief. Steve and I will be sharing portions of this presentation as our practices and our response efforts across Exelon and the BG&E and PHI companies are very similar related to major storm restoration response. I appreciate the tee-up conversation that the Maryland Public Service Commission staff provided related to this past summer. One of the things that we wanted to provide some context for this audience today was our efforts related to major storm restoration response, how it involves a planning aspect, our response structure, our storm response efforts themselves, our restoration priorities, and then obviously we'll talk about two events that were highlighted in the previous presentation. So if you go to the first page of your slide deck, we're talking a little bit about emergency operations planning. At Exelon, we use the all hazards approach, adopted by FEMA several years ago to plan our activities related to our sustained preparedness, our pre-event preparedness, the event actions themselves, and then the post-event preparedness. And you can see a number of things in the table that we provided there, everything from reviewing and updating our procedures, taking a close look at our tabletop exercises and our functional exercises to make sure we're ready to go. In an event, looking at the safety of the event, our weather monitoring, how we're dealing with our mutual assistance resources if we need to bring them on our system. And then obviously in the event, we would still be continuing those activities. And obviously post-event is a critical part of any activity, particularly in the circumstance related to evaluation of the storm restoration performance, and then what our lessons learned are, and then how we want to obviously adjust our procedures and plans based on what we experienced in that storm.
All right, next slide. So as Phil mentioned, him and I are really the two that run this for our respective companies. And what we do during response is really composed of these three major activities that you see here on the slide. The first one is really about keeping our internal folks informed, keeping them engaged. We hold many different conference calls, making sure we bring the right resources to bear. A lot of times it's internal. If it's a major event, we also bring in external resources. We also, in the second grouping here, make sure that we communicate effectively with our shareholders, our communities, anybody who is impacted as a stakeholder. And thirdly, obviously, during an event, we have great field crews. The women and men who work for us are some of the best in the industry, and they're out there restoring load as safely as possible and making sure that we utilize the different resources like vegetation management and doing restoration activities.
Thank you. If you go to the next slide, just shifting to response, a critical component of what we do after a storm or a major event has impacted our system is damage assessment. That's done as soon as it's safe to do so. Obviously, when we have hurricane conditions on our system, that can be somewhat hampered, especially if you have an event that's lasting 24 to 36 hours. But really what we want to do is be able to get a good sense of the extent of the damage. The initial assessment is also helpful for us to formulate what global ETRs look like. As mentioned previously, the RM43 standard, we do have objectives specifically related to establishment of a global and then more refined ETRs as part of that. But that is absolutely critical to our success in twofold. One is developing what our restoration time is, but then ultimately determining how our plan of attack and what we want to do to help restore the customers. A couple other things, though. Steve highlighted our internal crews. We have extremely dedicated people that are very proud of what they do day in and day out. But obviously, for some major events, we need to also rely on additional sources of workforce to be able to help us to restore our customers quickly. So we rely heavily on external contractors and external mutual assistance resources that help us manage the storm's impact. We've gotten very proactive in that space, particularly when it comes to preparing for major system events and making sure that we have those resources either on system or very close to being on system at the time that the storm has left our system.
All right, restoration priorities, you've probably seen or certainly understand a lot of this, right? So we prioritize all the outages. We just got hit with a major storm and we're looking at prioritizing those outages, making sure we get the right resources to them. So critical infrastructure, immediate life-threatening situations, transmission lines, hospitals. You can see the priorities at which we go after things on slide 5. So we have very well understood pathways and plans to prioritize these interruptions and get the right resources there. Also, during the event, we're also prioritizing our ETR, our estimated time of restorations. We understand how important ETRs are for our customers. So we are constantly focusing on updating those and trying to get those communicated out as effectively as possible.
So now on the next slide, we'll transition to just a little bit of discussion around 2 events that occurred on the respective systems this past summer. As mentioned previously, Friday, July 28th and Saturday, July 29th were very busy days for the PEPCO team. We had just neared completion of restoration related to our Friday storm when we had another round of storms come in and impact us severely. The comments are that, whether heavy rain, lightning, high winds to the system, we did register 84-mile-an-hour wind gusts in some portions of our territory, which can create significant damage to say the least across the territory. In particular, we had our total restoration for all customers affected on July 28th. It began at 1800 hours that evening, and then at the peak had interrupted 29,000 Maryland customers. As of 600 the next morning, we had restored service to 95% of those customers that had an outage related to that event within the 50 hours, according to the standard. We did have additional customers that had significant damage related to the storm. We had them completely restored by 1600 hours on August 1st. One of the things I want to point out is that we have gotten very hyper-focused on the tail end of the storm, in particular customers that are experiencing long duration outages. One of the things that we want our customers to recognize is that we have not forgotten them and that we want to have frequent touch points with them throughout the duration of the restoration event, provide them information related to potential cooling centers, those type of things, so that we can show that added care that we really care about our customers and want to make sure that they know that we're with them through the end of this. I will point out August 7th also, which was identified as a very busy day for BG&E. Our DP&L service territory did experience some significant weather-related effects of that. Vast majority of those, I'm happy to say to this body that those were in northern Delaware as compared to Cecil and Hartford County, Maryland. But we did have some impact in that area, and we did restore all those customers quickly and efficiently as part of that restoration effort. Steve.
Not to be outdone, we actually had 95,000 customers off in July. And then these videos here, those pictures, if you wouldn't mind just sort of taking a look at that on slide 7. You've probably seen these before. A lot of this made national news. Those poles down included transmission facilities and distribution facilities in Westminster and Carroll County. I've been through many storm events in 20+ years working in storm centers, and that was some of the most significant damage that I've seen. And when you think about those poles down, there were 40 customers who were trapped in their cars, from those facilities coming down. So just really want to thank, and you can move to the next slide, the bravery of the folks who work for us and the first responders of having 0 injuries coming out of that. As I did mention, for this event, we did have 120,000 customers off, and this was a Monday. And we had 95% of all of our customers restored by the end of the day Wednesday, and then 99% restored by end of day Friday. And I say that because when we look at, performance in this event, with this number of events, over 1,300 events, 1,600 resources, we were able to get everybody back on safely and efficiently.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. Really appreciate your time today. Seeing no questions for this panel, that concludes the panel and our briefings for today. Thank you for everybody for coming, and see you in January. I know we all can't wait.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.